Hello, hello, mi gente. We are ready for what's going to be one of the most important conversations we're going to have in Latinx Quest. We are here with the amazing panelists, Christian Arana, VP of Policy at the Latino Community Foundation, and Yadira Sanchez, the Co-Executive Director of Poder Latinx. And my name is Lili Gangas. I'm the Chief Tech Community Officer at the Kapor Center. And so, are you all ready for this session? Because I need you all to wake up because the giant is awake. For many decades, the Latinx vote has been called the sleeping giant. And in the 2020 election, we resoundingly saw that this giant is awake. So what's the role of combating the misinformation and doing the work it's to preserve and protect democracy? What's the role that the Latinx community has to play in this specific time? What's been the specific ways that we can continue to mobilize and really look at what is the future for grassroots organizing in this digital first world. So with that said, we are here with these two amazing panelists who are experts at all levels. And so with that said, why don't we get started and let's welcome them. So Yadira, we'll start with you. First of all, thank you so much for making the time to be with us. And we would love to start in understanding what led you to actually become the co-executive director of Poder Latinx. And how does your superhero story fit into this?
Thank you, Lili. First, I want to thank you for the invitation and, of course, Latinx Quest for having me today. I'm very honored to be here. I don't know about my superhero story, but I could definitely happy to share my background. I was born and raised in Santa Ana, California, a city that's predominantly Latinx immigrant. Both of my parents are Mexican immigrants. They immigrated here to this country in the late 70s, early 80s. And I was raised in a mixed status home where ICE and La Migra and family separation were always in the back of our minds. So now looking back in my current role and being raised there by immigrant parents with mixed status, I am who I am today because and I do the work that I do because of my family, my community. That's where I draw my, superhero strength. Definitely both of my parents are my superheroes. They have risked so much and sacrificed so much for me to be here today doing this work that's really important for our community.
Great. Thank you so much. And Christian, what about you?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Lili. And it's so awesome to be on a panel with my friend Yadira. I feel like we came of age together in civic engagement. So
and I'm younger.
Yeah, that's right. So it's always good to be with you, Yadira. For me, I don't consider myself a superhero. I think similar to Yadira's story, the superheroes that I know are my mom and my dad. They came to this country in the mid-1980s, fleeing the civil war in Guatemala. They had nothing in their pockets except a dream and an expectation that this other side, right, would be a little bit better than where they were in Guatemala, right? I think for them, they actually represent the stories of so many Latino families in this country. Many Latino families who serve as essential workers, as our society called them last year at the height of this pandemic. They had no choice and continue to have no choice but to work, right? Because they have bills to pay, they have to provide for their families. So when I think about superheroes and why I do this work, one of the greatest strengths a superhero can have is just like this relentless optimism, right? My family had every right to give up, just given the amount of barriers that were faced along their journey here in this country, whether it was citizenship status or the low wage jobs that they had, but they did it, right? They woke up every single day knowing that today just might be a little bit better. And because of them, I don't give up. This is why I work at the Latino Community Foundation, to make sure that we're investing in our own people. And that's something that I hope all of us can walk away with today from this conversation, that the power is really in our hands.
So with that, the power being in our hands, Christian, for the folks who may not be familiar with what this concept of quote unquote sleeping giant means, and especially what are some of the shifts that you've observed around the participation of the Latinx community, especially in just reflecting back in the 2020 election, especially in states like Arizona, Nevada, and California. So if you can just kind of paint the picture looking, now that we know the results and we saw, what should people really understand from that moment?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I always look to the advice and words of Ben Monteroso, who I know Yadira works very closely with. He always said that, like, how dare people call us a sleeping giant when we've been a community that's always been working? We've been awake, we've been mobilizing, right? And I think in 2020, we saw a record-breaking Latino voter turnout across this country because while this may not have been the most important election of our lifetime, it was literally an election between life and death, right? The choices that we made and the people that we selected to offices all across this country, leaving aside the presidency, were going to affect us, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So, for me, this was a real-time conversation about how we need to hold our leaders accountable. We saw the absolute failure of government throughout this pandemic. It's still happening today, unfortunately. But part of how we hold our leaders accountable is through the power of voting, right? And I think in 2020, we saw that realization come to light in full force. Leaving aside the fact that it was a presidential election, when you think about it at the more local level. So here in California, we had very powerful ballot measures that caught the attention of Latino communities that led us to want to turn out to vote. So for example, we were trying to change the tax code. You don't really hear Latinos talking about tax code, but we were having those conversations at home because we knew that so many of our local schools and communities were being underfunded because, quote unquote, rich people were getting tax breaks for generations in the state. We came out to vote to try to change that. We were also trying to reinstate affirmative action. Like, we wanted our fair shot to access higher education, to get fair abilities to win a business contract, for example. So this shift that we saw with Latinos in California and across the nation was an understanding that really, with our demographic power, literally, when we speak up, the world will hear us, and the world did hear us in 2020 with the results that we saw.
Definitely, and Yadira, especially from your team and the team that really was on the ground, what did you see specifically in states outside of California?
Yeah, I mean, Christian took my line there because I was just going to mention that the first thing I wanted to address is the sleeping giant, because our community has not been sleeping. We have been working, and we're working very hard, getting ready for this moment. And when I say this moment, if we look back to 1994 during Prop 187, SB 1070 in Arizona, SB 4 in Texas, there were direct attacks to the community, which led to leadership emerging and steadily increasing. And really a lot of grassroots organizations like Poder Latinx and many others across the country really mobilizing, organizing our community. What we saw in 2020 was not a shift. It was decades in the making of day in and day out organizations like ours putting in the work to make sure that we facilitate the process, because our community would also gone to vote if it was very easy, but in some states it was made very difficult for them to vote. Not everyone has the luxury standing in line for 6 hours to cast your ballot on election day. So there was a lot of barriers, and what we did and what many organizations across the country, making sure they're registered to vote, making sure we were getting folks who were able to be citizens get naturalized, making sure we empower the youth. And we got really creative, especially during this pandemic where we didn't have the normal access and approach. We had to get creative, innovative, and figure out different methods to get folks out to vote, to get them energized and engaged with so much on the line. And to be honest, I think 2020 was just a snippet of what our potential is, because 2020 is just the beginning. We could do much more once our political muscle is flexed. And definitely no sleeping community here, hardworking and really just steadily growing our political power.
I love it. I love it. And for the folks who are here, we're awake. We've been awake. We've been working. So definitely. Thank you, Yadira. And actually, to continue on the topic of the organizing, right? Given that the challenges that we had due to COVID and having to think of the role of technology, right, within organizing, being on the grassroots, what was one of your biggest challenges as that you've observed that maybe are the opportunity going forward, right? To continue to organize the Latinx vote and the role that technology played in that?
No, yeah, definitely. The pandemic, I believe, threw a curveball at everyone. No one saw this coming. And it was really scary at the beginning, not knowing when we would be able to resume the field, how our approach and our plan that we had been working so hard for would unfold with so much uncertainty. We had to pull our folks right away and pivot to traditional phone banking and text banking. But we definitely, our team got creative and in so much uncertainty, we figured out, we planned, we discussed among ourselves, how can we engage the community from remote using digital platforms like social media, which we rely heavily. All our webinars, our community or meetings and conversations were had on Facebook Live, on Instagram Live. We also partner with so many other creative artists that were very much engaged on the election as well. We had developed a 4-episode webcomic with Somos Arte, featuring La Borinqueña as our spokesperson, empowering our community, first targeting in Florida, our Afro-Boricua, our Puerto Rican community using this Afro-Boricua heroine, and then bringing our poderosas as well in Georgia, making sure we were speaking and uplifting Mexican descent Latinas. And we also did a virtual art gallery using art and culture to uplift the importance of voting early and getting out to vote. And we would also partner with Univision. Univision opened the door to our community's living room, and we were able to do so much great work with Univision support as well, partnership to really spread and continue mobilizing and empowering our community to go out and vote. Unfortunately, in the light of so much sadness and uncertainty, because our community, like Christian mentioned, like they didn't stop working. They were working through this pandemic. And we unfortunately lost a lot of folks within our own families and our communities. And the resiliency that our community showed to also come out in record numbers is really something that we as Latinx should be very proud of.
Right. I love it. And especially being able to show up, right, in the numbers, and especially in this, and despite all the challenges, to your point, I think I think the hunger and the amazing work of the folks like you on the ground. And Christian, on that note as well, I'm curious because the Latino Community Foundation also does grants to other organizations that are, leveraging technology in different ways, but especially around organizing. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you've observed as well that you think would be the greatest opportunities, perhaps, for the Latinx to increase the Latinx vote?
Well, yeah. Well, one of the things that Latinos list why they don't vote, I mean, there are many, but one of the things that we saw in real time was just the lack of voter education. Again, leaving aside the presidential election, like there was so much noise around Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, but in every single state, and I imagine in every single county and city across this country, there were local measures that were on your ballot. And how often are these ballot measures explained to Latino communities in a way that's accessible for them? So for example, earlier I was talking about like this proposition that we were voting on to change the tax code. It was such a completely nuanced conversation that easily gets lost for many Latino families, especially if you don't speak English, right? So the grants that we made to organizations across the state were meant to do that, right? To make sure that they have the organizers to have those conversations every single day with the communities that they serve, to make sure that they understood what exactly was at stake, but also to help explain what their vote meant if you voted yes or no on a certain particular measure. On top of that, as a community foundation, we actually went above and beyond. We created a Latino voter guide, for lack of a better word. Too often when we receive these mailers during elections, it's like these big, bold, scary letters that just makes people afraid and people don't understand stuff. We wanted to create something to what Yadira was mentioning, was something like culturally relevant, something that would be accessible for our families. And again, to help make people understand about what exactly is at stake with everything from the presidency to Congress to local ballot measures. Because when you talk to Latino communities, there's a litany of reasons why they don't vote, but there's always this ongoing concern of, afraid of voting wrong. And that's a reason why they don't vote. So for us in this past election and in elections moving forward, we want to make sure that Latinos feel informed so that they can go into the ballot box as empowered as possible.
So on that note of feeling empowered, knowing what to vote, what's your take of what were the results? Just also, again, reflecting right on the split within the Latinx between the Democrat and the Republican, but even in some of these local issues, right? And then looking at the world, the misinformation or even disinformation. So curious, Christian, on your end, when you saw those results, and you've been making a sense now, right, of trying to strategize of combating a lot of the misinformation, what's your take on this, and what are some of your recommendations for other folks who are also organizing the Latinx vote?
Yeah, I mean that was a great, unfortunate thing to witness in real time last year. Just the amount of misinformation and disinformation. I know there's a lot of coverage about that in places like South Florida, South Texas, but in the state of California, there was this confusion about ballot drop boxes. There were political parties that were setting up their own drop box, and you had people think to themselves like, well, do I trust putting in my ballot in this box? Yeah. And so, well, obviously one of the recommendations is for tech to be accountable. So the Facebook, the Twitters of the world, until we figure that out, or until they step up and help figure that out. One of the best ways we can combat this is, as I mentioned before, how do we get those trusted people at those trusted institutions to be the stalwarts, the carriers of this information, right? In moments of crisis or in moments of election or just any general everyday matters, the community always turns to the local organization that they're connected to for information, whether it's voting or even right now to access rental relief, to help with the food pantry, whatever it is, right? So our role at the Latino Community Foundation is to help make sure that that local institution is built to last. Not only, yes, of course, the money that we give to them is super important, but I actually want to make sure that they have the staff necessary to perform this work, that they pay their staff well, right? Because at the end of the day, if these institutions are not built to last, that's a loss for the community. So the more we can invest in these grassroots organizers and the institutions that they're tied to, the better we can combat the type of misinformation, disinformation that we continuously see, because we want to make sure that they're informed and that they're carrying out accurate information for moments like this.
Right. Thank you so much. And I think it's so critical to continue to invest, as you were saying, in building the infrastructure and the capacity, especially as just the levels of the role that technology in itself plays, right? So those trusted sources are so critical now more than ever. And so, Yadira, on that point as well, like, what was your take as far as like also just the insights and the learnings, right? When you saw the different voting patterns, and how did that inform, your work going forward, specifically as in all these different areas and how they voted so differently within our own Latinx groups as well?
Yeah, it's very interesting you asked that, because the day of the election in post, it was interesting that all the media want to talk about is like why the smaller percentage of our community voted Republican instead of focusing on the majority of our community that voted Democrat. It was like they were fixated of why this small chunk of our community pretty much voted against their own self-interest. And yeah, definitely disinformation had a huge role in that. We definitely have been saying that our community is not a monolith. And I feel like the campaigns this cycle caught on that. We saw ads being very specifically targeted to a certain demographic within our community in certain areas, triggering on our emotional strings, like, playing into the fact of where they come from their home, their mother, their home countries, talking about things that are not really related to issues or a political platform, but more on like instilling fear into the community. And we definitely saw that play out in different geographical areas. But I would say that the majority, if we think of why we saw the elections we did, it's plain and simple. Republicans were directly attacking our community. They were, the 4 years of the Trump era were direct attacks on a constant basis. We would wake up to see what President Trump had posted on his Twitter, and then what we had to do, because it was constantly like resist, resist, resist. And our community was tired. What we saw in 2020 was a realization of many folks that might have not voted in 2016, taking an active stance. What we saw is Latina voter turnout at really astronomical, record-breaking numbers. The youth, young people raising their voices, and that chunk of our demographic, which is a huge chunk within our electorate, will really call future elections in years to come. The power of the Latina electorate, the power of the youth vote. Let's be honest, who's carrying the Democratic Party? It could be Latina, similar to the Black vote. Where is the Black women voters that are carrying the party? So in that sense, the lesson learned here for future parties and candidates is that you have to do your research. You have to tailor campaigns to our community, not expect our community to be a one-size-fits-all. We need to make sure there's investment as well. We're not being talked to like last 3 months. There were specific campaigns and candidates that invested long before other candidates did, talking to the community. And that you saw the reward of that came election day. So the main shift that we're seeing is basically, if you talk to our folks, to our community, they will respond, and you need to talk to them in the language, in culturally, linguistically competent way, and talk to them about the issues that they care about. And that's how we got these record turnout in 2020. It was really a lot of great work and a lot of campaign organizing work that went into play.
That's so great. Thank you so much for recapping it. So to everybody there, you want to get Latinx vote? Do the work. You're getting a lot of great and really authentic recommendations here. But at the end of the day, I think to your point, Yadira, it's like there has to be an investment in making sure that you're reaching out to the different groups. And I think that's why organizations like you all are so important. So with that said, I want to shift it a little bit towards more of the community. What do you want the community that's here today to know about their impact and responsibility, especially in this moment, especially as what's at stake going forward, not just for the next 2 years, but I would say for over the next decade? So why don't we start with you, Christian? I know it's a loaded question, but
yeah. Well, obviously, anyone who's eligible to vote, I encourage you to register to vote and turn out to vote in elections, big or small, right? I think for me, what's been on my mind recently was this United Nations report that showed that our planet has actually passed the point of no return, and that anything that we do now will only just try to mitigate whatever climate challenges come our way. When you think about climate change and global warming and who this affects, it affects us, Latino communities, and not just us, Black communities, Native communities, other communities of color. So whether it's poor air quality because of wildfires or acts of environmental racism or droughts, right, that lead to water restrictions, Latinos need to understand that we need to speak up. And our votes really do matter because, as this report showed, like, time's up. And we need our elected officials to take these issues seriously. Just alluding to what Yadira was mentioning a little bit earlier, like, too often campaigns, political parties, they just paint Latinos as, they just care about immigration, right? But when you go into places like the Central Valley of California, more often than not, the top issue is water. I turn on the tap and nothing comes out. Or if something does come out, it's dirty and polluted. Who's going to help me get me clean water for me and my family? So looking ahead, well, obviously next year is a big election year with the 2022 midterms. But right now in California, we have a recall election of a governor. I'm not sure when this will be aired, but it might be after the fact. But we encourage everybody to turn out to vote for elections, big or small, because issues like this, the environment, our planet, the world is actually counting on us to use our votes and our voices around this. It's our responsibility as organizers like Yadira or me who work in philanthropic groups to make sure that we're walking with our community to make sure that they are as prepared as possible to turn out to vote in elections like these.
Thank you so much, Christian. Beautifully said, definitely. And Yadira, what do you want to tell the community now, especially as for not only as Christian was mentioning, their responsibility, but their impact?
No, yeah, I think the number one thing is that elections have consequences. And we're seeing right now probably one of the most historic bills that could bring so much investment to our community being decided on the floor. The House is anticipating a vote today, this week, and that really would means bringing so many millions, trillions of dollars into the community. And I think with recent release of the census, the numbers revealed that we are not the future. We are the present. And yes, the future will even include more of us. And sending this, our community needs to really own, like, this is our power, our numbers, our political power is really what's going to drive change into everyday lives. We need to get elected officials that represent our values, that have our best interests. And if they're not working for us, then we need to kick them out of office and elect leaders that will have our best interests. So if the community could take anything away, is that our power, every vote matters. It's everyone, millionaires, billionaires, everyone has one vote. So just think the power you have to vote for elected official that will represent your interests. And I did also wanted to say that why also, like Christian mentioned, this recall election, but this year we have elections. We have municipal races, and it's really important because this is who we elect that have really the power to change our everyday lives. From mayors to school board, city council folks, those are the folks that you could see those changes right away. And so we need to vote this year, we need to vote next year, we need to vote in every single election year. And I hope our community could take away from this wonderful conversation with you, Lili and Christian, is that we have a lot of power, and the power lies in our vote.
I love that. The power lies in our vote. And don't just wait every 4 years, every 2 years. There's elections, especially at the city level. So thank you for bringing that up. Your mayor, your school board. If anything, I would love to see more of our community continue to run for office. I think being able to support each other, to be able to build those next leaders at all different levels is really my call to action for the folks who are listening. And if you want to learn more how to get started, how to get organized, you have two amazing organizations that we were able to learn more about, but most importantly, two amazing leaders that are Latinx who are doing this work day in and day out. So I just want to say thank you to you both again. And with that said, we're going to get ready to close out. But I'll do since we're in the world of social media. What's your hashtag takeaway?
You go ahead, Yadira.
Oh, I was gonna say we always use the hashtag Poder Latinx or hashtag Votar es Poder. So definitely they're applicable here. Hashtag Poderosas as well.
Yeah, and usually with the Latino Community Foundation, we use hashtag Yo voy a votar. So like a commitment to vote. I'll also say, I mean, we're actually in the process of something called redistricting. So hashtag redistricting. So if we can get that trending, because even before we vote for people, there's a process where we redraw the political lines, and that has an impact on who represents us, how we're represented, what issues are taken up by our elected officials. So hashtag redistricting as well.
I know. I think we need like another session just on redistricting and going through some of that history. But on that note, I want to give a shout out to the Latino Community Foundation for helping me actually be part of the process, and specifically Christian, who helped encourage me to actually take action in my own local community. And so now I'm also an Oakland redistricting commissioner. So it takes the power of community and encouragement. So now I take my power to encourage you all to do the same. So thank you all again, and hope that we can continue to mobilize, and our vote is our power. So let's keep utilizing. So thank you again.
Thank you.